Thank you, Thomas. I really appreciate that. With that, I'll be the next speaker and build on that base of what Thomas had mentioned and cover a project that we're currently working on that deals with education on those topics of what have been presented today. Probably what you're going to find is that a lot of the content that we discuss while I'm going through this is stuff that's been hit on by every speaker in one way or another. And what that shows is that there's a bit of a consensus in our understanding of what the current challenges are in agriculture. Okay? There's another report that came out this last October that identified the 10 largest cities in America that have real issues with running out of water. 3 of those are in Texas. Okay? And those 3 are in the top 6. So out of the top 6 cities in America that are having real challenges with sustaining water, half of those occur in Texas. Okay, so in light of what Thomas just said about the importance of agriculture, we need to understand that there is likely a lot of political pressure coming our way to be fighting for that resource. In Texas, the water use distribution breaks down like this. Irrigation accounts for approximately 65% of the total water used. Municipal is 20% and on down the line. Obviously, irrigation is the lion's share of water use statewide. In our regions that we're familiar with, especially in the high plains and particularly in the panhandle, the percentage is 90% that goes towards agriculture. Okay, so we look at our share of this 60%, and it's a good large portion of that 65% given. Now, what implication does this have? Well, moving forward, we look at some of the high priority water areas that we need to address in order to help people understand that dynamic that Thomas just mentioned and the dynamic that we just looked at with that chart. The first one is that on an education basis, we need to deliver an adoption of higher level water management. Okay? When we're looking at our primary water use very locally as irrigation, we don't need to be necessarily dealing with running toilets or sinks that are left on completely. Those impacts, if changes are made, are very small compared to the potential impacts if we can affect irrigation management. The way we want to do that is look at those higher level water management skills. Okay, the next one is an improved public perception of agricultural water use and really agriculture in general. I'm sure we've all discussed this scenario with friends or with acquaintances or had this scenario discussed at us by somebody who is maybe ignorant, like it's been spoken of today. And there's lots of misconceptions related to agriculture. There's a lot of oversight where people don't recognize that the food that they consume or the clothes that they wear, etc., come from a water-using entity. Oftentimes the blame gets pushed towards agriculture for consuming all of those resources without the outward recognition that the end user has some sort of responsibility in that consumption as well. And so when we looked at some education deficiencies in the state, these were the 2 priority topics that came up. Some basic challenges that we face going forward in terms of rectifying some of the water use issues and increasing education on that is that there is a changing demographic in Texas. Thomas shared some numbers with us about an influx of people to cause an increase in population. Well, there's 2 levels to that change in demographic. One is non-natives that are coming in, even much like myself, where I'm a transplant from Arizona per se. But also those that are changing in terms of moving from agricultural communities to very urban communities. We also look at a diverse demographic in Texas. That's noticed very much in our changes in voting blocks as you go from area to area, locale to locale. And that's very important too, because the most populous areas are the ones that often have the most to learn about what's coming from and what the results of production agriculture are. A challenge that we've found most recently in addressing these education deficiencies is that effective media and educational venues are evolving. Just a couple years ago, I was an engineering consultant at a paper mill, and I looked around and realized I haven't taken the paper my entire life. I tried once, never read it. And I thought, here's an entity that's trying to sustain, and me living off of it never even was able to benefit from that. And I'm probably a classic example of where a lot of the common people my age are getting their information from. I went for years without TV. I haven't had a landline telephone in 10 years. Still don't get a paper, etc. Everything comes down to very quick online delivery for communication, as well as reliable news and educational venues. Another point that cannot be discussed or can't be overlooked on this is that the demand for agriculture is absolutely increasing as the population increases. There's more mouths to feed, more shelter to provide, more clothes to provide, etc. And then the last one is that the perceived relevance of agriculture is absolutely declining. And these bottom 2 points really define that dichotomy of what we're trying to deal with here today specifically, is we know that there's a very important need for technologies that we're working on and for an industry that we're dealing with, but the people who may be in charge of making decisions regarding regulation and direction of that industry are often very uninformed with what actually comes out of that and how that affects their life. So enter some approaches that we've made recently to try to rectify some of these issues. We've entered into some contracts for educational development programs to help teach the populace, as well as those who can make changes in water policy and water application. We are currently engaged in a Texas Water Development Board contract to provide educational enhancements to the Texas High Plains Evapotranspiration Network. The focus of that project and others is what we're going to talk about today. Ways to identify target audiences and then deliver pertinent information to help rectify and close this gap that we've been discussing. Okay. A parallel set of projects that goes with that are some technology transfer projects that have been funded by the Ogallala Aquifer Initiative and Program. One that we're currently working on is an educational video and slideshow content addition to the Ogallala Aquifer Initiative and TextPet websites. And one that was just funded this last year was development of viral web-based water use educational video content. And now we're going to get into why these are important. Before I do that, I must mention that 2 of those projects were funded based on the premise that the TextPet website was going to continue to be a vital source for information dissemination. In terms of a public delivery, that website is no longer viable, and so we've had to make adjustments to fulfill these contracts, but in the process have identified a methodology that we think is going to be very successful for delivering long-term water-related information to a myriad of different audiences. Okay, so identifying our target audiences to reach was very important and very general at the same time. One thing we knew is that the largest water user was our agricultural producers. They're also ones who are longing for information most often, and this is our ground-level adopters. And we've got a tremendous group of agricultural producers that we deal with. Collectively, the Texas Panhandle and Texas High Plain has been some of the best producers I've been around, and that includes production settings in California, production settings in Arizona, as well as in Oregon. Producers here are competent, and they're trying to make good decisions, much like what Harold said. Okay, so we were very excited to identify ag producers as one of those target audiences, because this isn't just about making knowledge-based impacts, but actually taking those knowledge-based impacts to real, tangible water conservation, water management impacts. Those ag producers is the only way that we can do that, and we'd be fooling ourselves if we said anything else. The next was to target the general populace, and within that general populace was to target the youth, recognizing that there are multiple generations that have seen an evolution in the importance of agriculture that is kind of step by step, year by year, pushed that understanding of agriculture farther and farther away from considered importance. You look at the conversations that we have where you ask a person, like we were mentioning a bit ago, where does your food come from? The grocery store. Where does the beef come from? The grocery store, etc. I know that sounds like nearly a trite saying, But it's a conversation that I've very literally had with people, even people right here in Amarillo who are surrounded by agriculture to the extent that you can't wake up every morning of the year to nice fresh air. You smell agriculture in the air, and people still have that disposition to deny the value of that.